Just to summarize here, um, to figure out like what you plug in with what, when we used range, the starting number that we used for range, or the first input to range, was the first index, or the first index of a list or a string that we wanted to start checking at if we're going through a list of items or a string. So if we're starting at the beginning, we would just be using 0 here. If we're not going through lists, if we're trying to, let's say, check the smallest number that's divisible by d that's greater than or equal to start, right, we would check at start, right? That would be what we'd start range with. So in general, it's the first value you want to start checking. That's what goes for the first input for range. Okay, the second input that goes for range, you have a lot of possibilities in certain cases. But if you're going and talking about a list of items or a string of characters, remember that the last one, the last character, or the last item in an array is going to be at the length of that string or the length of the array minus 1. So remember the way range works, again, I keep saying this, it stops 1 before. So what we want to do is we want to add 1, whatever that maximum value that we could want to stop checking at, no matter what. We add 1 to that, and that's what we put for the second thing, second input to range. So that would be numList.length or s.length. And again, it's not necessarily the one we will stop checking at. Usually we'll stop checking before that, right? When we're looking for the first positive, usually we'll find, I mean, depending on the list, right? We wouldn't expect the first positive to always be at the end of the list, to be at the numList.length minus 1. So this is just like the absolute largest value that it could possibly be. Similarly, when we were checking for the binary log of a number, in general, if we're trying to find the binary log of x, it's usually going to be less than x itself, right, or less than x minus 1. But x minus 1 is the absolute largest value we would stop checking at, so we add 1 to that to say x. Okay, that's what we're going to put as the last number for the range, right? So again, it's the absolute largest, and there's a lot of times flexibility for like the binary log. If you were trying to find the binary log of 1024, you could stop at 1023 no matter what. You would know it. Binary log of 1024 is less than or equal to 1023. It's a lot less, as we said, it's 10. But you could also put 1024 there, right, or 1025. So you could use x plus 1 or x plus 2, right? There's a lot of flexibility. Whereas for the list of items, you would want to stop pretty much all the time at numList.length or s.length, because you don't want to check positions that don't exist, right? So as an example, with this number list, for instance, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the last index is at 6. So you wouldn't want to check here ARR of 7, right? What's at position 7? JavaScript would just say that's undefined, but other languages such as Python would give you an error. And in other languages, like such as C++, you might just be checking some what's called like garbage. What's called garbage, I should say, what will be garbage. You'll be going and checking memory addresses and you don't know what's located there. So in general, you want to stop at the length minus 1, or again, you're just for range, you're putting s.length or numList.length because you'll stop 1 before that. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is figure out what you're going to put as the function that you're going to pass to find. So generally, it pretty much comes from the condition that you're looking for. So for example here, if you wanted to check the 2 to the d, if you wanted to check that when you were finding the binary log of x, you were trying to find an exponent, exponent d such that 2 to the d equals x. So this is pretty much what you should put as the output of the function. But if your input is num, right, this d is going to be undefined. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to replace this variable where you're repeatedly plugging in numbers to check it with the input variable, right? So in this case, instead of having 2 to the d is equal to x, you would have 2 to the num equal x, right? Another thing is that if you're searching through the indices of an array or a string, you're usually going to be, as we said, not using index itself, but doing like s bracket index or ARR bracket index or numList bracket index in the condition itself, right? So numList bracket index is greater than 0, right? So if you were trying to find the first number that's positive, you might say like, oh, let me look for num greater than 0. And instead of now replacing num with the input variable of index greater than 0, you say, well, that's just the position of my numbers. So I'm going to replace num with numList of index, right? Because that's going to be the number that I want. It's the number that's at the position of index, right? Okay, and just sort of again how find works. Find is going to repeatedly plug in the values from the range array. We worked with a range array, or I should say array generated by range, until true is received, and it's going to return this last input that it checks, right? The last input that it checks is going to be the one where it gets true. So it's really the first one where it gets true. Or if it goes through all of them and it doesn't get true for any of them, it'll just be undefined, right? So if you want this item, if you want this, if it's the index or if it's just the number that you want, you simply return it, right? But if you want the item or character at this index, like you wanted the item at the index when you were finding the first positive, use the array name, so like numList, and then put the variable that's storing the output from find in the braces, right? So again, here we stored the answer, really, or really the index where it occurred in first index of positive, and the array was ARR, so we returned ARR of first index of positive. Whereas for the string example, we just wanted the index, so we just returned the variable that was storing what find gave us back, right? First index of space. Okay, and finally, I want to mention that you can go through other arrays besides a list of consecutive integers generated by range. I believe I already mentioned that, but as I said, it's just useful for these applications. Just sort of this for most problems that we'll be solving. It's just easier to sort of have one way so you don't get confused sometimes. Oh, am I talking about the indices? Am I talking about the items themselves? If you're going through an array, sometimes I actually do go through the items, but in general, I'm trying to have you sort of have one way so you don't get too mixed up, right? When you feel more comfortable, you could just go through the array itself, right? If you are actually working with an array. Okay, so that's summary, and that wraps up this lecture.